From politics to what was that? We're rolling up our sleeves, tracking the biggest, the most explosive, most impactful local stories.
You want to see how pissed off people can get.
The people have a right to be heard.
It's the biggest facade, the biggest farce I've ever seen in my life.
Week in Review is made possible through the generous support of Dave and Jamie Cummings, Bob and Marlise Gorley, Smithfield Foods, Haas and Wilkerson Insurance, the Courtney S. Turner Charitable Trust, John H. Mize and Bank of America N.A. co-trustees, and by viewers like you. Thank you.
Welcome everyone, I'm Nick Haynes and thank you for joining us on this journey through the news of our week. Keeping tabs on our Metro's top headlines, he is Mr. Up-to-Date on KCUR-FM, Steve Kraske. From KCMO Talk Radio, Pete Mundo. From 41 Action News investigative reporter Kat Reed. And from the pages of your Kansas City Star, Dave Helling. Missouri Governor Mike Parson was in Kansas City this week. He was meeting with the mayor and the police chief to discuss escalating violence in the metro. Now, there have been 122 homicides in Kansas City as we tape this program. Were there any changes, policies, or laws proposed, though, as a result of that meeting to help reduce that number, Kat?
You know, there was a lot of talk, nothing concrete, but Quinton Lucas did say that he's put in a request for mental health funding in this upcoming budget. Of course, we won't really see what happens until the budget comes out. So it was more talk also about witness protection to protect people from retaliation, but not a ton of specifics.
The actual conversation was about the same length of this show. I mean, you make it look like there's this huge summit going on between each of these leaders, but it was about a 30 to 45-minute conversation. I got a sense, though, that the governor's talking about, for instance, we need the community to step up. Is he really actually interested in having any government intervention in solving a crime issue in Kansas City?
I don't think he is from a political standpoint, Nick. I mean, he's heading into a, obviously, not re-election, but I guess it would technically be his first election as governor in 2020. I don't think he wants to go down the road of state interference on the gun issue, but what he should be looking at is the funding angle. It's something we've talked about on the show when you talk about detectives with half these homicides mostly unsolved, on top of the fact that you have a police force that does not feel like it has the bodies it needs to get the job done right. That's a place the state should be helping out.
You know, there's a lot of focus on this issue, this summit on gun legislation. Pete's right. We're going into an election year. I wouldn't expect big shifts in gun legislation in Missouri. Having said that, Kat points to a very important aspect of this meeting, which is mental health funding. If you talk to any Kansas City, Missouri police officer, he or she will tell you that half the arrests, or even more, of what they deal with day after day after day has to do with folks who are struggling with one mental health issue or another. If the governor can move the needle on funding for mental health, whether it's more social workers, whether it's more community mental health centers in our community, that would be a big step forward.
Is there any evidence that would happen, though? Because the concern is this is still all talk, Kat.
It is still talk, and I don't think that we can say it's going to happen until we actually see it happening. I will say, though, going back, I wouldn't say he's unwilling to intervene, because if you look at St. Louis, they have diverted state troopers to intervene there. Of course, the mayor has said he is not interested in doing that here, but he has shown a willingness to intervene in cities on the violence problem.
There was some political component to this. The governor went to St. Louis 3 times to talk about their violent crime problem in September, and also, by the way, refused to consider violence legislation or gun legislation in the special session. That cost him some support in Kansas City, whatever limited support there is. So I think he did want to show, hey, I'm paying attention to the problem over here too. I do think the chances of gun legislation are very slim, except there might be a way for the legislature to step back and say, there are unique problems in Kansas City, St. Louis, Springfield, and Columbia. Maybe we should give them some leeway in further restricting weapons than maybe in the rest of the state.
But wouldn't that cost Governor Parson politically, though, Pete?
I don't think it would, to be honest. I mean, if he basically says the cities can do as they please and as they want, I mean, Mayor Lucas has found some loopholes on that front already, right, with minors and whatnot. Is that going to have the drastic effect, I think, that people want it to? No, but if the cities have the right to kind of, pick and choose what they think is best, I don't think it will hurt Governor Parson, because it won't affect the deep red parts of the state anyway.
By the way, in the first part of his visit to Kansas City, Governor Parson was at the Riga distillery that makes local whiskey and gin. He was spotted careening down a long slide. Now, his predecessor, Eric Greitens, had his thing, randomly doing push-ups on local stops. And Parsons' host, Mayor Lucas, showing a different side this week, too. Yes, that's him in the Kansas City Marathon. All business on top, running shorts and sneakers on the bottom. Do you have to engage in these kinds of stunts to be a successful elected leader today, Kat?
Listen, it's unfortunate the governor's schedule didn't line up. He could have been there alongside Quinton Lucas doing the shorts and the tie. But
yes, and I did notice that Mayor James never ran the marathon.
No, Mayor James would not be running a marathon, but you know, these things are important symbols as a way to connect with average voters out there, and I don't think we should take them for anything more than what they are.
Now, Mayor Lucas talking to the right people, being everywhere, but what about actually getting things done? You may remember the story over the summer about a landmark agreement between Kansas and Missouri to end the so-called business border battle between Kansas and Missouri. And you may remember how Overland Park-based company Waddell & Reed got under the wire to score more than $60 million in incentives to cross over the state line. Now, this week they want more. They're appealing to City Hall for millions in extra subsidies to build their headquarters in a brand new skyscraper downtown. It's a test of new Mayor Lucas's commitment to reining in big public subsidies for corporations. So has he shut the project down, Kat?
He is not yet. The Chief of Staff, John Stam, says that they haven't seen the final details of the deal yet, so they haven't shut it down. But they said they told the company it has to follow Mayor Lucas's previous ordinance of capping the abatements at 75%. And they said that also there has to be some mechanism. They've told economic development agencies there has to be some mechanism for giving funding to school districts and local taxing jurisdictions.
Dave.
Yeah, the mayor has been very lukewarm on this project, but has not said no to it yet. But the winds have changed, Nick. Yesterday, the TIF Commission recommended rejection of subsidies for a luxury hotel downtown. There will be criticism of this project. The so-called Strata office building project is on very shaky ground, may come back to the city council next week. There's no question that A, subsidies for these projects are under enormous scrutiny, and B, there is still a hunger for some evidence that this support is going to projects on the east side, in places where development is very difficult, and you don't see evidence of that yet. I do think the mayor recognizes that. That's why these are all going to be heavy lifts at the council, including the Waddell & Reed project.
And I have to say, even when it sounds like, wow, they're building a new skyscraper for offices, your own station did a report last year saying there was a need for more office space downtown, even though we think there's all that space there already. Exactly.
That's the argument, is there's a need for space, and the spaces that we do have currently are just not what these companies are looking for. They're old-fashioned. They're not these modern, sleek designs, so that's part of the demand.
But this is an amazing moment. This is 1,000 workers coming downtown to a 15, 18-story high-rise, a brand spanking new high-rise. But Dave is exactly right. The winds have shifted on this issue, and there's a chance the city of Kansas City might say no to a game-changing kind of project downtown. It's a big moment.
And let me just say very quickly, the average salary is $160,000 for the workers in this building. It's so politically difficult to vote to subsidize that when there are people on the east side who cannot feed their families. And that's what really members of the council and other groups, interest groups, are really looking at. They've got to have some evidence of doing something for the poor before they can do something for the wealthy.
And let's not forget a name in all this, Alicia Canada, who's the head of the TIF Commission. Quinton Lucas appointed her that. They both deserve credit for those roles, and that is kind of part of this whole conversation.
She was here just a couple of weeks ago. Now she's back. The president's daughter, Ivanka Trump, in Kansas this week, and this time with Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. Where did they go, and what was the purpose of the trip, Steve?
They went to Wichita, Nick, and they were talking about workforce development. But boy, the purpose of this trip will be debated for a long time to come. You know, Mike Pompeo coming back to Kansas again with all these rumors swirling that he might be setting himself up for a run for the U.S. Senate next year. What really struck me about this trip, being a lifelong journalist, is he gave a one-on-one interview to the Wichita Eagle, the Secretary of State of the United States of America. To me, that was a sign that he is really focused keenly on keeping ties back home.
I know, but he says he's here for a wedding, and really he's only been here 4 times. It was nothing about his U.S. Senate campaign, Claire.
it's kind of difficult to not read into this, as it's not just a visit to Kansas. I will say that Jonathan Shurman of the Wichita Eagle did a really great interview with him, and he asked him, is this really where you need to be right now? And that's when he said, you know, I'm here for a wedding, and it's great to come back to Kansas, etc.
Now, Kansas Senate President Susan Wagle sent out a campaign mailer this week asserting that Pompeo will not run for the U.S. Senate seat in Kansas. And now, with the leading names in the Democratic Party coalescing around Barbara Bollier, she says she's the one best equipped to take her on. She does it by throwing all of her opponents under the bus, including Chris Kobach, who she claims already lost to someone with a very similar profile to to Bollier, and that's the Governor Laura Kelly. Is she the most capable Republican to take on Johnson County Senator Barbara Bollier, Pete?
I think right now you can go down to Susan Wagle, or you would go to Congressman Roger Marshall, simply because of the fact that he's in that big 1st district that has been a feeder role for the U.S. Senate. He also has the most money. Wagle's got to raise better money. I mean, she raised $500,000, but $275,000 of that was her own money on a loan. So I have not seen that statewide grassroots push for Susan Wagle. But if you want to look at the optics of a strong conservative female pushing back on a left-of-center female, then yes, it does make sense. But the fact that she's pushing back on Pompeo without any type of word tells me that's to help her own fundraising as well.
And I will say, you know, Wagle is far from the only Republican who's had some negative words for Chris Kobach. Many people, the National Party has even said that they didn't really want him running in this race.
Now, but what was interesting about her campaign mailer was how she thoroughly dissed not just Kobach, but all her opponents, including Roger Marshall, the 1st District Congressman, who she claimed was really just a moderate pretending to be a conservative. Is that why Marshall this week was one of the 24 or so Republicans grabbing the headlines for storming a closed-door impeachment hearing on Capitol Hill?
He doesn't have the guts to tell us why we can't come in the room, why he doesn't want this to be transparent. It's the biggest facade, the biggest farce I've ever seen in my life.
Dave, I've never seen him that animated.
Yeah, we'll get used to this. I mean, I think there's going to be a lot of nipping and tucking in the Republican field in the weeks and months ahead. I do think it will contract. I do think at some point some of the candidates might decide, well, this isn't my time, and drop out of that race. And you might get 2 or 3 serious candidates. But Roger Marshall, the idea that he's some sort of moderate is hysterical. I mean, the Republican Study Committee this week, Nick, put out a long study of what it wants to do to replace Obamacare. And it's the typical sort of saving accounts, and Obamacare is a disaster, and Medicare for all would be socialism. Roger Marshall was the chair of the committee that put that out. I mean, he's a very conservative guy. So is Dave Lindstrom. If you think, go to his Facebook page, it's all socialist this and
yes.
Democrats
I actually tried to go to his website this week, and we couldn't find it.
Yeah, it's interesting. So I guess my point is that there will be a stampede to the right in this race, and who can get the farthest to the right. And this message from Susan Wagle is part of that.
But it's going to remain highly unsettled until we have absolutely a definitive word from Mike Pompeo either way, Nick. That drama is going to play out perhaps for months to come.
Now, you may remember the news from earlier this summer about plans to move the research arm of the U.S. Agriculture Department from Washington to Kansas City. Now that effort might be expanding. Missouri Senator Josh Hawley has introduced legislation to move 90% of federal agencies out of Washington and to other parts of the country. In fact, under his proposal, co-sponsored by Tennessee Republican Marsha Blackburn, the entire Agriculture Department would relocate to Missouri. How is this latest proposal being greeted, Kat Reed?
Well, there's some pushback immediately because the Office of Personnel Management says that 85% of federal employees are already located outside of D.C. And so the argument is the people who are there because of the proximity to lawmakers and to work there. So there is a lot of pushback. Also, you look at how the move to Kansas City has gone for that research arm of the USDA, and there's some skepticism if that could be done with all of these departments.
But Senator Hawley believes this saves money and it actually makes those agencies more responsive to the public. Is that the rationale behind this?
And I had Senator Hawley on the show Friday to talk about this, and then we took kind of reaction from listeners. Now, yes, those listeners have a clear bias, but I'll tell you right now, there is not a lot of complaints from listeners on this issue. Now, people in D.C. may not like it. That's fine. That would destroy the D.C. real estate market and economy, which is why I don't think the realistic nature of this is all that serious right now. But it's a good conversation starter to have, because Democrats and Republicans, one thing they can agree on right now is the dissatisfaction of a so-called swamp inside that beltway, for lack of a better word. And it's something that people want to see rooted out of politics.
You know, there's a lot lot of political gamesmanship going on here, Nick. There was a story in the Washington Post this week that Senator Hawley was reacting to. The headline of that story was, "The White House didn't like my agency's research, so it sent us to Missouri," implying that it was punishment to be sent out to Missouri. So Josh Hawley then responds by coming out and saying, well, then we're going to move all these agencies out of Washington to punish Washington for its elitist attitude. I wouldn't hold your breath on any of this happening anytime soon.
But back, though, to those research arms that were supposed to be coming to Kansas City, and we did see those stories that many of them didn't want to come here, and you say it would be in Missouri, but I thought they were still undecided. It could be on the Sprint campus. It could be at Crown Center. Did they make that decision?
No,
Dave?
They're still looking for a place, and they're looking for employees. I was told there's a trade fair planned by USDA to try and find some folks to fill these positions because a lot of the people in Washington, for one reason or another, decided not to move. You know, I do think that one of the things we might also talk about, and this has been talked about seriously, is whether the Congress needs to go to Washington, whether there might be a way for senators and members of the House to move back to the states they represent. I don't think Josh Hawley is really interested in that. He went to Stanford, he went to Yale. Washington, D.C. is where Josh Hawley wants to live.
He also went to Rockhurst High School right here in our own backyard.
And quickly, I'll just say that 60 employees have relocated, so there will be a ton of hiring opportunities through the USDA.
Alrighty, vaping back in the headlines this week. A push to raise the age to buy e-cigarettes from 18 to 21 was rejected this week in Blue Springs. Meanwhile, in Kansas, as the state still wrestles with how to tackle a growing number of health concerns connected with vaping, one of the state's top Republican lawmakers has proposed raising the tax on vaping products. It's part of his plan to help fund Medicaid expansion in Kansas. This plan seems rather unusual. Hasn't he been one of the biggest opponents to Medicaid expansion and one of the biggest opponents of tax increases in Kansas? So why propose a plan that would do both, Steve?
Well, Senator Jim Denning, Nick, is getting religion here. He faces a very tough re-election battle next year, and suddenly a guy who was anti-tax and anti-Medicaid expansion, as you point out, is shifting, showing signs that he's willing to be open to both ideas going forward. And that's because, again, he's really fighting for his political life as he goes into 2020.
I think the ice is cracking a little bit around the resistance to Medicaid expansion. Kansas remains an outlier, as does Missouri, which, by the way, will almost certainly vote statewide on Medicaid expansion in 2020. And so I think Senator Denning's, let's just take him at his word, and in good faith, he's offering at least a starting bid for some discussion of Medicaid expansion, which, by the way, he promised a year ago. You know, the fact that the Republicans don't like his plan and Laura Kelly doesn't like it is some indication that maybe he's kind of on the right track, because what he said in essence is, if we're going to do this, we've got to have a dedicated revenue stream. We can't just make it out of the money that's in the current budget. And that is at least a supportable idea, that if you're going to do something this big, make sure you have the money for it. So it's an opening bid, but I think it's serious and could lead to a real discussion of Medicaid expansion next year.
Is there outrage or not? Is it a total mess or a big exaggeration? Two very different views this week on the drama over property appraisals in Jackson County.
Absolute mayhem. Because people, I mean, you want to see how pissed off people can get, make them think they're going to lose their homes because we've screwed up.
That's County Legislator Crystal Williams in a Channel 9 report this week. While they warn of mayhem when tax bills start popping through mailboxes shortly, the Kansas City Star, in an extensive report this week, claims the outrage is misplaced. And in fact, a third of home owners will actually pay less taxes than last year, and 2/3 will only see a modest increase. What are we then to make of these latest figures, and are citizens buying it, Kat?
Well, I think that it's interesting to see these figures, and I think it does put the problem into perspective. But for the 5,600 people who are seeing a huge increase, like more than 100%, this just hurts them so deeply that there is going to be outrage. And when people get those tax bills, we will be hearing about this a lot. That's quite a few people to have such a huge increase.
Absolutely. And we talked about this earlier in the week. The Star report said only 5,600 people would see a doubling of their tax bills, as if 5,600 people couldn't cause you a lot of aggravation.
Yeah, I mean, it's about 1% of your population in the city, and then you could say, well, only 122 people have been killed in Kansas City, Missouri this year. I mean, you can put only in front of any other number to justify it. Well, 500,000+ people weren't killed. That doesn't matter. The point is 5,600 people are seeing that 100% increase, and even those under 25%. If you're at 20 to 25% on a fixed income, what that could do to your property taxes, it's easy for you and I to sit here and say, oh, that's not that big of a jump, but that is going to have real consequences on real people in town.
But we're not going to know, ultimately, until the second week in November when those bills start going through people's mailboxes, right, Dave?
And one of the reasons that the impact will be less than some people think is taxing jurisdictions have rolled back their levies as required to do under state law, except for the school district, Kansas City School District. And so that lessens the impact. Anytime you do a reappraisal, some people are going to get hurt. Some people are going to get helped. The whole point is to try and get accurate values across the entire county. So there will be stories about people who are in danger of losing their homes and complaints about it politically. No one, to my knowledge, has offered a remedy yet that would be fair to everyone in Jackson County. If you roll back to 2017 levels, that means some people who are getting screwed then will get screwed again. So the remedy is very difficult to see. It's easy to complain about, much more difficult to fix.
The remedy, I mean, you know this, Dave. I mean, with the fact that the 14.9% number where 75,000 people fell at exactly that percentage point, so then you didn't have to go out there and physically look at the location. Right. The remedy is to fix it from the get-go and do it the right way instead of looking at Google map photos to try to figure out what the increase should be.
And that's the remedy going forward. And we had a meeting this week with the consultant to talk about what you do in 2021, which, by the way, is a year away. So the next reappraisal, it is 2021. And it needs to be done earlier and needs to be done better. But fixing this year's problem, absent rollbacks, is very difficult to understand because everything you do is going to affect some people positively and others negatively.
It appears to be too late, Nick, for another remedy, which would have been to gradually impact these folks who are going to see these big increases going forward. The time frame for that solution, I think, is come and gone. But a lot of members of the legislature were talking about that months ago, and it wasn't implemented.
The state legislature could play a role in this in 2020 by enacting a circuit breaker of some sort in which property values that exceed a certain level in a given year are capped, so that you could, in essence, require a phase-in of some of these higher increases. But again, that's going forward. The current situation is very complicated, and anything you do to fix one problem will create a problem somewhere else.
It's a story making national news this week. MoDOT apologizing for editing a photo of a boy wearing a Trump shirt and cap. The 13-year-old had won a contest to push the detonator for a controlled explosion on a bridge that was being replaced. But he surprised Missouri Transportation Department officials when he showed up wearing Trump apparel. So their official photo blurred out the president's name and his Make America Great Again slogan. MoDOT now says they made an error in judgment. But media companies often blur out logos from images. Is this different?
Well, I'll tell you right now, Nick, what MoDOT needs is a better graphic designer, because that was the worst Photoshop job of all time. I mean, it was like somebody opened it up in Microsoft Paint and started blurring it out. It was pathetic. You know, if you want to blur it out, fine. I understand you don't want to make an event like that political in any way. People would argue, you know, would that happen with other politicians? That's fine. I just think that MoDOT should have been upfront about it. Tell the kid, hey, you can take the hat off, or we're going to blur it out. Instead, trying to cover it up so pathetically like that is what kind of caused a little bit of uproar.
You know, I go and I think about what MoDOT, what was going through their minds as they posted that, where they said, here's this 13-year-old who, you know, it's such a cool opportunity and it's such a positive story. We don't want any negative comments about people who don't support the president, like on this picture. But in retrospect, I think they realized that it was just a mistake.
But there must be some things that they would have done that with, and people would have been okay. If he had a T-shirt that said "God hates gays" or "I love the KKK," would they have done that then and blurred that over? Or because they're a government agency, would they have still had to have let that be shown?
Well, that would have been a really interesting moment. Best you can say about this whole caper, Nick, is give MoDOT credit for apologizing for its mistake, because it did do that after a slight delay, and that's the best you can say here.
Yeah, I think they made a mistake in blurring it out. It wasn't going to end the world if you had a Trump cap on a kid blowing up a bridge. I would say this, if MoDOT hired a good graphic designer, Pete Mundo would be on the radio going, what a waste of money in Missouri to spend money on graphic designers. This is a transportation department. Let them do roads and bridges.
I'll be honest, he's not wrong.
That's exactly right.
Now, when you put a show together like this every week, we can't get to every major story. What was the big story we missed?
Was it pot pushback in independents' anger over a vote to keep zoning laws in place, making it tougher to open marijuana dispensaries? In Kansas City, anger that the council isn't going far enough or fast enough to decriminalize the drug.
This is the people's house, and the people have a right to be heard.
Longtime Kansas City radio host and former Hollywood actor Jerry Fogel has died. He was 83. Alarming, creepy, awesome? Mixed reactions to the hologram concert in KC, bringing rock and roll legends back from the dead. Historians say he's responsible for tens of millions of deaths. Now he's on display in Kansas City. Genghis Khan, the latest immersive exhibit, now open at Union Station. And for some, the biggest question of the week, is this a medical miracle? A week after a hard-to-watch injury, Chiefs coach Andy Reid says he's not ruling out the return of Patrick Mahomes as they take on the Packers Sunday night.
Just some of the other stories. Did you pick one of these options at home or around the panel, or did you pick something completely different, Kat?
I think medical marijuana. We are getting down to crunch time of when decisions are being made, and I think that the battle you're seeing in Independence is very interesting. It could result in the city facing legal action. You know, these are very difficult issues, and if we eventually have recreational marijuana in Missouri, these are important conversations that they're having right now.
Pete.
I went with Jerry Fogel, longtime host on KCMO Talk Radio. We had on your colleague Mike Shannon, who was a co-host of his for many years. So Jerry was obviously part of the KCMO Talk Radio family. His son is part of the Cumulus family right now. Dave is on KCMO FM in the middays. So that's a hit for all of us at KCMO and Cumulus, and our thoughts and prayers with the family.
Thank you. Steve.
Well, and I picked Jerry Fogel too, Nick. For personal reasons, I got my start in radio by appearing on the Fogel and Shannon show early in the morning at the old Marriott downtown at 7 a.m. And those guys got me started, and I thought Jerry was a pretty funny guy.
Dave.
I would say the Missouri legislature had an interim hearing this week on gambling, sports gambling in Missouri. 2020 will be the year that Kansas and Missouri will either decide to get on this train or get off. And that's an important development in our community.
And that is our Week in Review. Thanks to Steve Kraske and Kat Reid from KCMO, Pete Mundo, and Dave Helling of your Kansas City Star. I'm Nick Haynes from all of us here at KCPT. Thanks for spending part of your weekend with us.